It's a crisp, early morning on a busy Los Angeles street. Commuters rush by with coffee cups and cell phones, barely noticing a tired 62-year-old homeless woman standing near the curb. Dressed in a worn military field jacket, she clutches her shopping cart of belongings like a lifeline. Her name is Susan, though no one asks it. To them, she's invisible, just another figure on the sidewalk. But as a small group of young, uniformed Air Force personnel marches down the sidewalk, something in Susan awakens. Straightening her posture, she raises her hand in a perfect salute. Her movements are practiced and sharp, echoing a discipline drilled into her decades ago. For a brief moment, Susan stands tall, not as a destitute vagrant, but as the proud Air Force sergeant she once was. A few passers-by slow down to watch, their expressions puzzled. Then comes the snickering. Two teenagers point and giggle at the sight of a ragged woman saluting crisp young soldiers. A businessman smirks as if he's witnessing a ridiculous street performance. Susan's cheeks burn, and her hand trembles mid-salute. Humiliation washes over her, but she doesn't lower her arm. She holds that salute, determination and pain flickering in her eyes. Just then, the unexpected happens. Amid the bustle, one man notices Susan's salute and stops in his tracks. A tall figure in a decorated Air Force uniform steps forward from behind the young troops. His weathered face is stern, commanding respect without a word. The laughing teenagers fall silent, confused. Commuters halt, sensing something important is unfolding. The officer slowly lifts his right hand and snaps a crisp salute toward Susan. In that instant, time seems to freeze on the sidewalk. Susan blinks in astonishment, hardly believing what she's seeing. A high-ranking Air Force general is saluting her. The crowd's sneers turn to gasps. No one expected this act of honor toward a destitute old woman. They watch, riveted by the surreal scene. Little do they know, this simple salute is about to change Susan's life forever. If you believe that every hero deserves respect and a second chance, stay with us. Susan Turner wasn't always invisible. Decades ago, she wore a uniform herself. Fresh out of high school in the late 1970s, Susan enlisted in the United States Air Force, determined to make a difference. She became a medic, trained to care for wounded soldiers in the field. Back then, she was Sergeant Turner, a steady hand in chaotic situations. She served with honor through the 1980s, from base clinics to makeshift hospitals on overseas missions. Susan saved lives, bandaging bleeding comrades under fire, comforting young airmen far from home. The military was her family, giving her life purpose and structure. But when Susan's service ended and she returned to civilian life, her battles were far from over. The transition to ordinary society in the 1990s was harsh. The skills that made her a hero in uniform didn't translate easily to job interviews and office work. She struggled to find her footing. Nightmares from past missions began to haunt her sleep. Scenes of helicopter evacuations, blood-stained uniforms, frantic calls for a medic. She would jolt awake at 3 a.m., heart pounding. In the daytime, she put on a brave face, but inside Susan felt adrift without the camaraderie and clear mission of the Air Force. Life slowly unraveled. An old back injury from a field accident worsened, making physical work painful. Medical bills piled up, eating through her savings. Without family support, her parents long gone, no spouse or children, Susan had no safety net. She took odd jobs when she could, grocery clerk, security guard, but employers didn't understand the faraway look in her eyes when a siren blared or a helicopter passed overhead. Eventually, she couldn't make rent. About 10 years after hanging up her uniform, Susan found herself on the streets of Los Angeles, the same city where she'd once trained as a young airman. Now, 62, Susan sleeps under an overpass just a few miles from the Air Force base where she served her final years. Each morning, she folds her threadbare blanket with military precision and tucks her few belongings neatly into a shopping cart. Old habits die hard. She still rises before dawn, standing quietly at attention to greet the sunrise as if it were the flag being raised. Yet, as proud and disciplined as Susan remains in her heart, the world around her only sees a homeless old woman. People hurry past her slumped figure without a second glance. On good days, someone might toss a few coins into her paper cup. On bad days, she endures insults. "Crazy old lady, talking to herself," one passerby muttered when Susan softly recited the Pledge of Allegiance under her breath. They didn't know her story and they didn't care. To most strangers, Susan was a cautionary tale or a nuisance, not the decorated veteran she truly was. She kept her Air Force dog tags hidden under her shirt, close to her heart, a silent reminder of who she used to be. Some nights, when the ache of loneliness cut deepest, she would pull those dog tags out and trace the engraved letters of her name, reassuring herself that those years of service were real and not just a dream. One memory in particular kept Susan going on her hardest days. During a humanitarian mission in the early 1990s, her field hospital came under attack. She had been wounded and pinned under debris, certain her time had come. But a senior officer braved the chaos to pull her to safety, shouting, "I've got you, airman, hold on." That officer's courage saved her life. She never even got to properly thank him. In the frantic evacuation, they were separated, and later she heard he'd been promoted and transferred. Still, the image of his face, strong, calm, determined, stayed with her through the years. In dark moments, she'd whisper to herself, "Someone out there cared once. Someone remembered me." Yet, as the decades passed, that hope dimmed. Standing on the sidewalk with holes in her shoes and an empty stomach, Susan sometimes wondered if that rescue long ago had meant anything. Would it have been better if she hadn't made it out, instead of living to see herself so alone? She tried not to let such thoughts fester. "I survived for a reason," she told herself. Maybe that reason hadn't revealed itself yet. In a city of millions, it seemed no one saw the hero Susan once was. Do you think someone who served their country should ever be left forgotten on the streets? What Susan didn't know was that fate had a plan for her. A plan decades in the making. All those years of being overlooked were about to end. Because on this very day, at a bustling street corner in Los Angeles, Susan's past was about to leap back into her life in a way she never expected. Susan had no inkling that this ordinary morning would turn extraordinary. After packing up her few belongings at dawn, she made her way toward a familiar intersection near the base. She often lingered there, drawn by the distant cadence of drills and hoping to catch a glimpse of the men and women in uniform who reminded her of her past. As a squad of young Air Force trainees approached, marching briskly down the sidewalk, Susan felt her heart quicken. Their pressed uniforms and confident strides took her back in time. Without thinking, she set down her cart, squared her shoulders, and lifted her hand to her brow in a proud salute. She held that salute even as a few bystanders began to snicker. Inside, Susan's mind flashed to years long gone, standing in formation during morning colors, saluting the flag alongside her unit. But now, hearing the cruel giggles around her, she felt a lump in her throat. For a split second, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. If she really did look crazy. Maybe I am just a foolish old woman playing soldier, she thought. Shame tugging at her. Still, she did not drop her hand. Then came a voice, firm and clear. "Company, halt!" The command cut through the air like a sharp breeze. To Susan's astonishment, the column of young soldiers obeyed instantly, stopping mid-march. She lowered her hand uncertainly and turned toward the authoritative voice. Stepping out of a staff car that had pulled over was an older officer, the same man we saw saluting her in the crowd moments ago. He must have been following the unit in his vehicle when he noticed Susan's gesture. The crowd's laughter died at once as this imposing figure approached the scene. The officer's chiseled features and silver hair suddenly struck Susan as familiar. Up close, she could see the insignia on his shoulder, a silver star gleaming in the morning sun. This was a general, Brigadier General James Anderson, to be exact. Susan's heart pounded. Could it really be? Decades seemed to fall away as she peered at him. Yes, she knew that face. It was older now, lined with years of service, but the memory of it was seared into her mind. General Anderson stopped a few feet in front of Susan and looked intently into her eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then hesitated, emotion flickering across his face. Susan stood rooted to the spot, one hand still awkwardly half raised in an unfinished salute, the other white-knuckled on her shopping cart handle. Around them, a hush had fallen. The teenage girl who had been laughing moments before was now wide-eyed and silent. A middle-aged man in the crowd had removed his baseball cap, sensing this was no trivial encounter. "Sergeant Turner?" the general finally asked, his voice gentler now, colored with uncertainty and hope. He hadn't spoken that name in years, but he remembered. Susan's eyes widened. She hadn't been called by her rank in so long. "Yes, sir," she managed to reply, her voice barely above a whisper. As she said those words, tears brimmed in her eyes. A spark of recognition ignited in General Anderson's expression. In disbelief, he breathed, "Susan, it's me, Anderson." Hearing that, a soft cry escaped Susan's lips. "Colonel Anderson?" she said hoarsely, using the rank she'd known him by so many years ago. The general gave a modest, almost apologetic smile. "It's General now," he nodded, "but it's good to see you. It's been a long time." Susan's hand flew to her mouth as a sob of relief and joy shook her thin frame. She could hardly find words. You saved my life, sir," she choked out. The general's eyes glistened. "And you saved so many others, Sergeant," he replied softly. "I never forgot you." In stunned silence, everyone waited to see what would happen next. If you also believe in honoring unsung heroes like Susan, please subscribe. General Anderson came to attention and offered Susan a crisp salute. This time, not out of protocol, but out of profound respect. Though her knees felt weak, Susan drew herself up and returned the salute as smartly as her trembling arm could manage. When their hands lowered, the general stepped forward and, to the amazement of all onlookers, gently wrapped his arms around Susan in a warm embrace. In that moment, Susan finally let go of the stoic control she'd clung to for years. She sank into the general's embrace and began to sob openly, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face onto his decorated shoulder. It was the first comforting touch she'd felt in ages. "You're safe now, Sergeant," General Anderson whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. He patted her back reassuringly as she wept. One of the young airmen in the halted squad shifted in uncertainty, not sure whether to watch or give privacy. Noticing this, the general turned his head slightly while still supporting Susan. In a clear voice, he addressed his troops. "This woman is part of our Air Force family. Show her the respect she deserves." Immediately, all the trainees snapped to attention. In unison, the dozen young airmen raised their arms in a perfect salute toward Susan. The sudden salute from so many brought a fresh wave of tears to Susan's eyes. She stood in disbelief, a weathered veteran being honored by a new generation. The same pedestrians who had mocked her now stared with faces soft in awe. Some wiped away tears, the moment touching even the hardest hearts. The general then gently removed his own impeccably pressed blue service coat heavy with medals and ribbons, and draped it over Susan's thin shoulders. She started to protest, bewildered by such an honor, but he held the coat in place around her. The warmth of the finely tailored fabric and the scent of brass and wool enveloped her. Susan's hand clutched the lapel to keep the coat tight around herself, overcome by the gesture. Underneath that uniform coat, she no longer felt like a homeless nobody. She felt like a valued Air Force sergeant again. "Let's get you taken care of," General Anderson said softly, still holding her arm to steady her. Susan realized her legs were shaking. The flood of emotion left her lightheaded. She had stood on raw willpower for so long, but now relief made her almost faint. The general signaled to his aide, a young captain who had been watching slack-jawed. Snapping out of it, the captain rushed forward. "Sir?" he asked. The general gave him a calm but firm look. "We're taking Sergeant Turner to the base hospital," he ordered. "Get the car, please." The captain sprang into action with a crisp, "Yes, sir," and jogged off to fetch the general's vehicle. As General Anderson guided Susan gently toward the curb, the crowd parted to make way. Some of those who had laughed now offered quiet apologies or words of encouragement. "Thank you for your service," one woman murmured, bowing her head shamefully. Susan was too overwhelmed to respond, but she gave a small nod, clutching the general's coat around her like a protective cloak. The staff car rolled up, and the captain hurried out to open the rear door. General Anderson helped Susan into the back seat as if she were royalty, ensuring she didn't bump her head. Before he followed her in, he paused and looked back at the onlookers, his voice clear and dignified. "This veteran earned our respect," he said to no one in particular, and to everyone at once. With that, he gave a final nod to the assembled crowd and slid into the car beside Susan. As the door closed and the car pulled away, Susan peered out the window in dazed wonder. On the sidewalk, the young soldiers were still standing at attention, saluting as the vehicle departed. The civilians who had witnessed everything now broke into gentle applause. A few waved in respect. Susan pressed a trembling hand to her heart. In a single astonishing moment, she had gone from invisible and ridiculed to seen, valued, honored. The city blurred past the car windows as General Anderson gave her a reassuring smile. Susan realized she was heading onto the base she once called home. Not through the side entrance as a forgotten veteran, but escorted through the front gates with the general by her side. At the base hospital, nurses and doctors quickly surrounded Susan as General Anderson escorted her in. He stayed right by her side while the medical staff gently settled her onto a gurney. Susan protested that she was fine, but her trembling hands and gaunt frame told another story. The general's jaw tightened as a doctor murmured about her condition: malnutrition, dehydration, and a touch of pneumonia from all those cold nights. His eyes flickered with concern and regret that someone who had served under him had been suffering like this. Over the next few days, as Susan recovered in a clean hospital bed, General Anderson visited whenever he could. On the first morning, he arrived at her bedside with a cup of hot coffee in hand. Seeing Susan sitting up, already looking healthier after warm meals and rest, he smiled in relief. "Good to see you on your feet, Sergeant," he said, handing her the cup. Susan's eyes filled with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, sir," she whispered. It still felt unreal that the very same officer who once saved her life was here, caring for her again. The general pulled up a chair. "Just focus on getting well." "That's an order," he replied with a gentle chuckle. Then his expression grew serious, his voice low with remorse. "All those years, we never knew you needed help, Susan. If I had known, I would have been there for you. We all would have." Susan lowered her gaze, a tear slipping down her cheek. "After I left the service, I didn't know where to turn," she admitted. "I was too proud to ask for help. I thought I could handle things alone." Her voice faltered. "I guess I couldn't." General Anderson reached over and clasped her hand between both of his. "You didn't fail, Susan. If anything, we failed you," he said firmly. "No one who served this country should be left behind." His eyes glistened as he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "But you're not alone now. You never were. You've always been part of our family." Susan nodded, wiping her eyes. In that moment, the shame she'd felt for so long began to melt away. Word of the general's reunion with a homeless veteran spread around the base like wildfire. Airmen and officers who heard the tale sent cards, flowers, and notes of gratitude to Susan's hospital room, even if they had never met her. One afternoon, a young lieutenant stopped by with a surprise: a neatly pressed Air Force dress uniform jacket bearing the chevrons of Susan's old rank. Attached was a note reading, "For Sergeant. Susan Turner, welcome home." Susan's hands shook as she held the jacket. Running her fingers over the familiar insignia on the sleeve, she felt a swell of pride and belonging she hadn't felt in years. By the end of the week, Susan was well enough to walk steadily on her own. True to his word, General Anderson made sure she had a fresh start. The Air Force and Veterans Affairs worked together to find Susan a place in a respected veterans housing community nearby. On the day she was discharged from the hospital, the general personally drove her to her new home, a cozy, furnished studio apartment with a small American flag hanging by the porch. It wasn't a mansion, but it was safe, warm, and hers. Susan stood in the doorway, clutching the new set of house keys, hardly recognizing the smiling woman reflected in the entryway mirror. She wore the Air Force jacket draped over her shoulders like a cape, the tech sergeant stripes gleaming proudly in the soft light. Before leaving, General Anderson turned to her at the door. Standing in her tidy new living room, Susan looked so much younger than the frail, hunched woman he'd found on the street just days ago. "Remember," he told her gently, "you have family here. If you ever need anything at all, just call me. We take care of our own." Susan's eyes brimmed with tears as she nodded. In that moment, he wasn't just a high-ranking officer. He was truly the guardian angel she never expected to find again. As a final gesture, the general brought his hand up in a crisp salute. This time, it was private, just between the two of them in the quiet hallway. Susan drew herself up straight and returned the salute, her hand steady at her brow. "Take care of yourself, Master Sergeant," General Anderson said softly, using the rank she had earned long ago. With a warm smile, he patted her shoulder and departed, leaving Susan standing tall in the doorway of her new home. A week later, at General Anderson's urging, the base organized a small ceremony to honor Susan's service. Dressed in the uniform jacket that had been gifted to her, Susan stood at attention in front of a gathering of Air Force personnel and local community members. General Anderson himself pinned a long overdue medal on her chest, his voice ringing out proudly as he announced her years of bravery and sacrifice. The audience of young airmen and officers erupted in cheers and applause. Among them, Susan even recognized the two teenagers from the street corner. Now they were clapping harder than anyone, faces shining with respect and remorse. After the ceremony, those same teens approached her nervously, eyes full of tears. They stammered apologies for their cruel laughter that day. Susan simply opened her arms and pulled them into a gentle hug, forgiving them with a smile. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. And the teenagers smiled through their tears, relieved and grateful. That evening, as the sun set over Los Angeles, Susan and General Anderson walked side by side outside the base headquarters, the once homeless veteran and the officer who had given her hope. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and purple. Susan paused, looking up at the American flag fluttering high above, and felt her heart overflow. She raised her hand in one more proud salute, not out of obligation, but out of pure gratitude and pride. The general stepped up and saluted alongside her, and one by one others around them, young soldiers, officers, even civilians, followed suit in the golden light. Heroism is defined not by rank or wealth, but by the heart. On that day, everyone who witnessed Susan's journey understood this truth. What began with a simple gesture of respect on a street corner blossomed into a life-changing moment of compassion. Susan's life was pulled from the shadows, and along with it, the faith in humanity among all who saw it was renewed. With hope lighting her path, Susan Turner stepped forward into her new life, knowing she would never be forgotten again.